I've replayed the beginning of my story so many times it almost feels like someone else's life now. But it was mine, every second of it. Back then, I was just a regular guy trying to build something solid from nothing. I was 28 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of rough hands you get from years of real work instead of desk jobs. I worked as a senior project coordinator for a mid-sized construction and infrastructure firm in the Midwest, the kind of company that didn't make headlines but quietly handled contracts that kept cities running. I wasn't rich, not even close, but I was stable, disciplined, and ambitious. I believed deeply in delayed gratification, in working hard now so life could be easier later. I drove a paid-off pickup truck, rented a modest apartment, and spent most of my evenings reviewing blueprints or estimating costs. I thought that was enough. More importantly, I thought I was enough for the woman I planned to marry. Her name was Lauren. We met when she was 24 and I was 26, both of us standing in line at a crowded coffee shop near a downtown office complex. She worked in marketing for a lifestyle brand, always dressed sharp, always thinking 3 steps ahead. If you love ruthless revenge stories packed with shocking twists, like this video and subscribe now. New, never-before-seen stories are released here every day, each more intense than the last. Lauren was beautiful in a polished, effortless way, the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. She had a quick laugh, expressive eyes, and a confidence that drew people in. We dated for 4 years before I proposed, and when I did, it wasn't flashy. No orchestra, no fireworks. Just a quiet rooftop dinner I planned myself, with the city lights behind us and a ring I'd spent months saving for. She cried when I asked, said yes immediately, and told me she couldn't imagine a future without me. At the time, I believed her without hesitation. We were engaged for just under a year, planning a small but elegant wedding that fit our budget and our lives as we knew them. We talked often about age, timing, and success, though I didn't realize then how differently we defined those words. Lauren was 28 when we set the wedding date, the same age I was, and she made comments about how she didn't want to struggle forever, how she admired people who had already made it. I thought she meant emotionally, professionally, spiritually. I thought she admired ambition and drive, not bank balances and luxury cars. I told her my career path was steady, that within a few years I'd be managing larger contracts, earning bonuses, maybe even starting my own firm. I showed her spreadsheets, projections, and long-term plans, because that's how my mind worked. She smiled and nodded, told me she was proud of me, kissed my cheek, and said she believed in us. I never noticed how often her eyes lingered on penthouse listings or how quiet she became when her friends talked about private vacations and designer rings. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They crept in quietly, disguised as distance and distraction. Lauren started attending more networking events without me, dinners I was too tired to join after 12-hour work days. She talked about a man she'd met through work, an older investor type who offered career advice. She said his name casually, like it meant nothing, and I didn't question it because I trusted her completely. I was raised to believe trust was the foundation of love, and I held on to that belief even when it started costing me. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was already too late to stop it. The woman I loved was slipping away, not because I treated her badly or failed her emotionally, but because I wasn't rich enough fast enough. And when she finally left me for a man old enough to be her father, a man with money, influence, and status, she thought the story was over. She thought I was just another chapter she could close quietly. What she didn't know then was that my story was only beginning. The day Lauren left me is burned into my memory with a clarity I wish I didn't have. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies make breakups look. No screaming matches or shattered glass. Just a quiet finality that felt worse than anger ever could. I came home from work earlier than usual that evening, my head full of numbers and timelines from a delayed project that had kept me on edge all week. When I unlocked the apartment door, I noticed immediately that something was off. The place felt emptier, lighter, like air had been let out of a room. Her shoes were gone from the rack by the door, the ones she wore almost every day, and the framed engagement photo that usually sat on the console table was missing. I stood there for a long moment, my keys still in my hand, telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation, even though my chest had already started to tighten with familiar, sinking dread. Lauren was sitting on the couch when I finally walked into the living room, her posture stiff, her hands folded neatly in her lap, like she was waiting for a meeting to begin. She looked calm in a way that scared me, composed and distant, wearing a tailored coat I'd never seen before. I remember thinking how out of place she looked in our small apartment, like she had already mentally moved on to somewhere bigger and better. She didn't waste time with small talk. She told me she had been doing a lot of thinking, that she felt we were on different paths, and that she didn't believe love alone was enough anymore. I asked her what she meant, even though I already knew, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. She avoided my eyes as she explained that she had met someone else, someone established, someone who could give her the life she wanted now, not years down the line. When she finally said his name, it felt like a punch I hadn't braced for. He was a wealthy real estate developer in his early 50s, a man who owned properties across several states and moved in circles I had only ever seen from a distance. She told me he had mentored her, supported her ambitions, and made her feel secure in ways she claimed I couldn't. I asked her if she had cheated on me, and after a pause that felt endless, she admitted that while it hadn't started that way, things had crossed a line weeks ago. The betrayal cut deep, but what hurt more was how easily she justified it. She spoke as if choosing him was logical, almost responsible, as if love were just another investment decision, and I was a risky option she no longer wanted to hold on to. She told me she was moving out that night, and that the wedding was obviously off. The word obviously echoed in my head, because nothing about that moment felt obvious to me. We had shared years together, built routines, made plans, talked about children and houses and growing old side by side. I reminded her of all that, of the sacrifices we had both made, of the future we had promised each other. She listened politely, like someone humoring a stranger, and then told me she had already made up her mind. She said she needed more, needed stability and luxury and a certain kind of respect that came with wealth. I realized then that no matter what I said, I was already part of her past. She hugged me goodbye, a brief, awkward embrace that felt rehearsed, and walked out the door with 2 suitcases and a calm certainty that shattered what was left of my heart. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I threw myself into work, taking on extra hours and projects just to avoid the silence of my apartment. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, and food tasted like nothing. Friends tried to check in, but I brushed them off, ashamed of how completely blindsided I had been. I replayed every conversation, every moment, searching for the point where I could have done something differently. At night, I stare at the ceiling and wonder how easily I had been replaced, how quickly 4 years have been erased by a man with money and influence. I told myself it wasn't about love, that Lauren had chosen comfort over commitment. But knowing that didn't make the pain fade any faster. Then the invitation arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope with elegant lettering, announcing Lauren's wedding to man she had left me for. They were getting married less than a year after our engagement ended, in a lavish ceremony at a private estate outside the city. I stared at that invitation for a long time, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Part of me wanted to tear it up and forget it ever existed. But another part, a quieter and more dangerous part, felt something shift inside me. I realized that while Lauren thought she had traded up and left me behind for good, she had underestimated me completely. She saw only who I was then, not who I was becoming. And as I stood there holding that invitation, a new resolve settled in. I wasn't going to chase her, beg her, or try to win her back. I was going to rebuild myself in silence. And when the time was right, when she least expected it, I would make sure she saw exactly what she had lost. After the shock settled, and the night stopped feeling endless, something inside me hardened into focus. I realized that if I stayed where I was, emotionally and professionally, I would drown in regret. So I made a decision that changed everything. I stopped talking about what happened and started working like my life depended on it. I volunteered for the toughest assignments at work, the ones everyone else avoided because of the pressure and responsibility involved. I took on remote projects in other states, managing logistics, budgets, and crews with relentless precision. My days started before sunrise and often didn't end until well past midnight. I upgraded my certifications, learned new project management software, and studied investment basics during lunch breaks. I wasn't chasing revenge yet, not consciously. I was chasing control. Control over my future, my finances, and the version of myself that had been left behind without a second thought. Within a year, my efforts began to pay off in ways even I hadn't expected. I was promoted to lead project manager on a multi-million-dollar infrastructure development, overseeing contracts that dwarfed anything I had handled before. With that promotion came bonuses, stock options, and introductions to people who didn't just work jobs but own companies. I learned quickly how different wealthy conversations sounded, how money moved quietly through relationships and opportunities. I listened more than I spoke, absorbing lessons about leverage, risk, and timing. I invested carefully at first, then more boldly as my confidence grew. Real estate, development partnerships, and private equity deals slowly replaced my old savings account mentality. I still lived modestly, still drove the same truck, but my bank balance told a different story. Every achievement felt like laying another brick in a foundation Lauren would never know existed until it was finished. Emotionally, I changed just as much as I did financially. The man who once believed love was enough learned how fragile trust could be when ambition outweighed loyalty. I didn't date seriously for a long time, not because I couldn't, but because I refused to repeat old mistakes. I observed people more carefully, paid attention to what motivated them when no one was watching. I learned how to stay calm under pressure, how to negotiate without revealing my hand, and how to keep my personal life private. The pain Lauren left behind didn't disappear, but it transformed into discipline. Every time exhaustion tempted me to slow down, I remembered how easily I had been discarded. That memory didn't weaken me anymore. It sharpened me. I wasn't building success to prove her wrong. I told myself. I was building it so no one would ever have the power to reduce me to an option again. 2 years after she walked out of my life, I saw her name again, this time attached to glossy online photos from social events and charity galas. She looked happy, elegant, draped in luxury I recognized from magazines but had never touched. The man beside her was always present, older, confident, and clearly proud of what he considered his achievement. I felt no jealousy when I saw them, only a quiet sense of inevitability. She had chosen her path, just as I had chosen mine. What she didn't see behind those photos was how far I had already gone, how my influence had begun extending into the same circles she now occupied. I was no longer invisible, just intentionally unseen. When the wedding invitation resurfaced in my mind, I realized something important. Showing up wouldn't be about causing a scene or confronting her publicly. It would be about presence, about standing there as undeniable proof that the man she left behind no longer existed. And when that day came, the regret wouldn't need words. It would be written all over her face. By the time the wedding date drew close, my life barely resembled the one I had been living when Lauren walked out of my apartment with her suitcases. 3 years had passed, and in those years, I had quietly stepped into a version of myself I once thought would take a lifetime to reach. I had left my old company and partnered with 2 seasoned investors I met through a development project, launching a private infrastructure and commercial real estate firm that specialized in revitalizing undervalued properties. On paper, I was listed as a co-founder and managing partner, a title that still felt surreal whenever I saw it in official documents. I was 31 then, still young by industry standards, but my portfolio told a different story. I dressed better, carried myself differently, and spoke with the confidence of someone who had survived loss and turned it into leverage. Yet beneath all that, I remained careful, deliberate, and patient, because I knew timing mattered more than speed. The The wedding invitation arrived again, this time as a reminder email from the event coordinator, polite and impersonal. It felt almost comical that they still expected me to attend, or perhaps Lauren did, convinced that my absence would be proof that she had won. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the idea sit with me, turning it over from every angle. I wasn't interested in confrontation or petty revenge. I had no desire to interrupt vows or embarrass anyone publicly. What I wanted was closure, not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from truth. I wanted Lauren to see me as I was now, not because I needed her approval, but because I needed her to understand the weight of her choice. She had measured my worth by my current balance sheet and decided I wasn't enough. I wanted her to realize how wrong that calculation had been. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, I prepared quietly. I confirmed my attendance, arranged travel, and booked a room at the same estate hosting the wedding. I hired a tailored suit that fit me perfectly, understated but unmistakably high-end, the kind of craftsmanship only those in the know could recognize. I didn't bring a date, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want distractions. This wasn't about proving I had moved on romantically. It was about showing that I had arrived professionally and personally. I rehearsed nothing, planned no speeches, and made no assumptions about how the day would unfold. The power, I knew, would be in my silence and my composure. People notice confidence when it doesn't ask to be seen. When the day finally came, I arrived early, blending into the flow of guests as if I belonged there, because in many ways I did. The estate was breathtaking, manicured lawns, towering white tents, and luxury cars lining the drive like a private exhibition. I recognized faces from industry events, investors I had crossed paths with, people who nodded at me with polite recognition. Lauren noticed me just before the ceremony began. I saw in the way her posture stiffened, the way her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she regained control. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I watched confusion ripple across her face, followed by disbelief. I didn't approach her or offer congratulations. I simply took my seat and waited. I knew that everything she thought she knew about me was unraveling silently, and that realization alone was enough to shift the balance of power she thought she held. Throughout the ceremony and reception, I felt eyes on me, whispers traveling faster than I expected. Someone mentioned my firm in passing. Another guest congratulated me on a recent acquisition, unaware of the history, sitting quietly at their table. I remained calm, polite, and distant, answering questions without elaboration. When Lauren finally approached me during the reception, her voice was tight with forced cheerfulness. She asked how I had been, how work was going, as if we were old acquaintances instead of former fiancés. I smiled and told her I was doing well, that life had a way of working out when you stayed focused. She nodded, clearly unsettled, glancing toward her new husband, who was deep in conversation with one of my partners without realizing it. In that moment, I understood something clearly. Revenge didn't require cruelty. Sometimes, it only required patience and presence. The real impact came not from what I said, but from what she saw, and a growing awareness that the man she left behind had surpassed every expectation she once used to justify abandoning him. The moment of truth didn't come with a dramatic announcement or a public confrontation, and that was what made it so powerful. It came later in the evening, after the speeches were done and the champagne had loosened tongues and lowered guards. I was standing near the edge of the terrace, looking out over the softly lit grounds, when Lauren approached me again, this time without the forced smile she had been wearing all night. Up close, I could see the strain in her expression, the subtle tension around her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. She asked if we could talk somewhere quieter, her voice low and uncertain, and I agreed without hesitation, not because I owed her anything, but because I was curious to see what regret looked like on someone who once believed she had made the smartest decision of her life by walking away from me. We stood beneath a canopy of light strung between old oak trees, far enough from the crowd that our conversation felt strangely intimate. She started by saying she hadn't expected me to come, then admitted she hadn't expected me to look the way I did, to carry myself with the confidence I now had. She asked what I was doing these days, even though she clearly already knew pieces of the answer. I told her calmly about my firm, my partners, and the kind of projects I was working on, not boasting, just stating facts. With every sentence, her expression shifted further, admiration mixing uncomfortably with something darker. She confessed that seeing me there had unsettled her, that it made her question things she thought were long settled. When she said that, I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet confirmation of what I had already known. Success has a way of rewriting history for the people who doubted you. She finally said the words I never thought I'd hear from her mouth, that she wondered if she had made a mistake. She talked about how her new life looked perfect on the outside, but felt rigid, transactional, and lonely in ways she hadn't anticipated. She admitted that her husband respected her, but didn't really know her, that their relationship was built more on convenience and image than genuine connection. As she spoke, I realized how far apart we truly were now. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the same one I had loved, and I wasn't the man who had begged for reassurance years earlier. I listened without interrupting, without offering comfort, because this wasn't my burden to carry anymore. When she finished, she searched my face for some sign of forgiveness or longing, and what she found instead was calm indifference. I told her the truth, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I told her that losing her had forced me to confront myself, to grow in ways I never would have if she had stayed. I told her that I didn't hate her, but I also didn't miss her, because the version of me she left behind no longer existed. I explained that I had learned the hard way not to build my identity around someone else's approval, and that lesson had been worth more than anything money could buy. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a brief moment, I felt a familiar ache in my chest, a reminder of who I used to be. But it passed quickly, replaced by a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. I wished her well, genuinely, and walked back toward the reception without looking back. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, I caught one last glimpse of Lauren standing beside her husband, her smile strained, her gaze distant. He had no idea what had just happened, no idea that the man he saw as just another guest represented a life she would always wonder about. I didn't feel victorious as I left the estate, just lighter. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It lives in the quiet moments, when the people who underestimated you finally understand the cost of their choices. Driving away under the dark sky, I knew my chapter with Lauren was truly over, not because I had shown up at her wedding, but because I no longer needed to be seen to feel whole. In the months after the wedding, I noticed a strange calm settle over my life, the kind that only comes after a long internal war finally ends. I didn't feel the urge to check social media for updates about Lauren, nor did I replay our final conversation in my head the way I once replayed our breakup. Instead, my focus sharpened even further, because without emotional noise clouding my judgment, I could see opportunities more clearly than ever. My firm closed 2 major acquisitions that year, projects that position us as serious players rather than quiet participants in the industry. I moved into a modern home overlooking the water, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I could, and because it reflected the life I had built intentionally. Every decision felt grounded and deliberate, no longer driven by fear of abandonment or the need to prove my worth to someone who failed to see it. Occasionally, I heard things about Lauren through mutual acquaintances or industry gossip that drifted my way despite my efforts to avoid it. Her marriage, while outwardly flawless, had become a carefully managed performance, full of obligations, expectations, and unspoken disappointments. She attended galas and charity events, smiled for cameras, and played her role well, but those who paid attention noticed the absence of warmth in her eyes. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing this, only a quiet understanding. She had chosen certainty over growth, comfort over potential, and while those choices brought her status, they cost her something deeper. I realized then that true revenge wasn't showing her what she lost in material terms. It was living a life so aligned with my values that her opinion of it no longer mattered at all. That realization freed me more than any confrontation ever could. As for me, I began mentoring younger professionals, people who reminded me of myself before everything fell apart. I told them the truth about ambition, about how success requires patience, resilience, and an uncomfortable amount of self-belief when no one else is cheering for you. I didn't tell them my story to inspire pity or admiration, but to show them that setbacks often carry the seeds of transformation. I traveled more, invested more wisely, and allowed myself to enjoy the fruits of my labor without guilt. Relationships came and went, but this time, I chose carefully, valuing integrity and shared vision over surface-level attraction. I no longer feared being alone, because I had learned how dangerous it was to tie your identity to someone else's validation. The man I had become stood firmly on his own foundation. Looking back now, I understand that Lauren didn't ruin my life by leaving me. She redirected it. Her decision forced me to confront my limitations, refine my goals, and become someone I might never become if things had gone according to plan. Showing up at her wedding wasn't about humiliating her or reclaiming some imagined moral victory. It was about closing a door with dignity and walking fully into a future I had earned. If she regretted her choice, that was something she would have to live with quietly, just as I once lived with heartbreak. My story didn't end at that wedding. It truly began there. And the greatest revenge of all wasn't my success, my wealth, or my composure. It was my peace. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.